And welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our third of three webinars introducing the Department of Education's inaugural learning agenda. I am really excited that you're taking time out of your day to be with us. It is great to see so much interest in this series overall and in this topic, which today focuses on post-secondary education and post-secondary value. My name is Matt Soldner. I'm the department's Chief Evaluation Officer and a commissioner here at our Institute of Education Sciences in our National Center for Education Evaluation. Just a few housekeeping issues before we jump in. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be shared. Go ahead and make sure that you are muted and your camera is off unless you want to become part of the recording. We'll be using auto-generated captions. If you'd like to turn them on, you can do so by going up to the top of your screen and hitting that More button. Later on, we will reopen both the chat cameras and mics during our QA session. So if you hear anything today as we're presenting that you want to follow up on, please be sure that you take a note of it. We will have time at the end of today's session to take, hopefully, as many questions as you all have for us. If we have more questions than we can answer today, we'll do our best to get back to you as a group in writing. And without further ado, let me go ahead and jump on in. Let me say I am so pleased not just to talk about this issue, which is very near and dear to my heart, but to be joined by a really wonderful colleague here at the Department of Education. He'll join us in just a few minutes. Jordan Matsudaira, our Deputy Undersecretary and our Chief Economist, the inaugural Chief Economist here at the U.S. Department of Education. If you're not familiar with our structure here, you can see a bit about the Office of the Undersecretary on this slide. But the job of OUS and the team there is to oversee higher education policy, including the Office of Federal Student Aid. And the Office of the Chief Economist, as I mentioned, is new with Jordan as our first Chief Economist, really focused on using evidence to inform policymaking. And that's why I am so excited to have him here with us today. He is really walking the talk when it comes to evidence-based policymaking. I, of course, over here in IES, if you're not familiar with IES, we are the department's statistics, research, and evaluation function. I am, however, taking off my IES commissioner hat for the rest of this hour and putting on my chief evaluation officer hat, which is separate from, but obviously really related to the work we do over here in IES. I'll turn it over to Jordan in just a few minutes, but first I'll give you an overview of our whole session. I'm going to start by making sure we all have kind of some basic level setting around what I mean when I say learning agenda, what I mean when I say evidence, and how the learning agenda is meant to support evidence-based policymaking in the department. I'll quickly cover then the department's stated strategic goals and objectives related to this, but then I'm going to turn it over to Jordan to talk about the work that's happening in the Office of the Chief Economist and how that work is supporting evidence-based policymaking in the department. He's really going to focus on work related to federal student aid programs. So when he's finished, I'll come back in and cover some priority learning questions that we have in other areas of post-secondary ed, and then I will wrap up with an ask of you, letting you know the different ways that each of you might choose to get engaged with our evidence building work. And suffice to say, I really hope that you take us up on that offer and get involved as we go down this path. If this is the first webinar in this series you have joined, there were two that we did before today. Our first focused on supporting a diverse and talented educator workforce. Our second focused on meeting students' social, emotional, and academic needs, specifically in the K-12 setting. Those sessions were also recorded. You can go to IES's YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Institute of Education Sciences, and you'll find both of these. We'll also put the direct links to both of these webinars in the chat. Don't watch them now, save it, and when you have time, go back and watch them at your convenience. And I'd certainly be glad to follow up on anything in either of those webinars if you have questions or comments. But let's turn to today. What's a learning agenda? In 2018, Congress passed the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, and it really focused on encouraging agencies to use the highest possible evidence they had at their disposal in the service of meeting their mission, really particularly operationalized as the strategic goals and objectives that are outlined in agency and strategic plans. Um, I would not expect that all of you are following agency strategic plans as closely as perhaps some of us in government are. So if you haven't seen the department strategic plan, it is available at performance.gov. We also have strategic plans for every other large agency on that site. So after today's webinar, I'd encourage you to go to performance.gov and check it out. So the Evidence Act, as we call this act in short, encourages agencies to use evidence in policymaking, and importantly, when they don't have evidence that bears upon policymaking, to take steps to do it. The priority learning questions that emerge from that process, that delta between what we wish we knew to make evidence-based policy and what we have at our disposal, form priority learning questions. And those priority learning questions make up a department's learning agenda. So I've mentioned the word evidence probably 10 times today, and haven't yet told you what I mean by evidence. Within the department, when we do our regular quarterly trainings, which we call Evidence 101, we use the definition for evidence that you see on the screen. It is high quality information used to inform decision making, created when the appropriate analytic methods are applied to trustworthy data. So that's the definition. What does it look like in practice? So our colleagues in the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, have developed what I think is a really helpful framework in thinking about the different kinds of evidence that can be brought to bear in policymaking. So in the upper left-hand corner of this graphic, you can see a type of evidence we call foundational fact-finding. It really gets to the notion of what are conditions on the ground. And if you think about the work of NCES, our National Center for Education Statistics, and all the work they do around the Digest of Education Statistics and the like, that's foundational fact-finding. But it can also be qualitative data collections, all trying to help us understand what's going on in colleges, states, and districts. Another form of evidence is performance measurement, and it asks both whether we as an agency are making progress towards our stated goals, but also inside our grant portfolio allows us to ask whether or not our grantees are achieving the goals and objectives they've set for themselves. A third kind of evidence in the lower left, which you're about to hear a lot about when Jordan comes on, is policy analysis. And really, policy analysis asks what might happen if we adopted a policy, or what do we begin to see after having enacted a policy in terms of changes and important outcomes. And then finally, certainly last but not least, is program evaluation. That's the kind of work we do here in the IES, in particular in my center in NCEE. And it asks what works in a real kind of traditional causal framework. Do we know what's doing the needle? So really importantly, I think, this graphic makes it clear that evidence isn't just the purview of the kind of people who do work in IES or the kinds of studies we undertake. Evidence really is something that can be built in every office in education and has a wide range of looks and rigor, but all of which can be informative to greater or lesser degrees as we make evidence-informed policies. So evidence is meant to be everywhere at Ed. It is meant to be everyone's business. But really importantly, the Evidence Act makes it clear that the department cannot do this evidence building work alone. Nowhere in the Act does it say that government is meant to be a solo actor in this work. It really encourages a whole ecosystem to be built up around each agency to build relevant evidence. And so you can tell this is leading up to a pitch, which I will make to you later, about engaging with us in that ecosystem. This is already happening in lots of ways. Jordan may talk about it in his section in just a few minutes. But this is a real moment of intentionality for us, sharing with you our questions and inviting you to jump in with us as we begin to build answers to them. So what are the questions? So our learning agenda, as I mentioned, meant to support our strategic plan, was initially published in July of 2022. That's when we published our agency-wide strategic plan. You can find the learning agenda both in our strategic plan, but also separately at an OMB site called evaluation.gov, which is focused on the entire evaluation community. So you can go to evaluation.gov after this webinar, click on agencies and drill down to find the department's learning agenda. You can also find the learning agenda for every other large federal agency and a really handy dashboard that allows you to search across agencies by topic or interest. So a wonderful way to see how there are common questions related to equity or COVID recovery or the workforce government-wide. When you get to our specific learning agenda, you're going to see that we have 6 focus areas, and they're fairly well aligned to the Secretary's priorities. There's a bit of splitting out to make sure everything gets full attention, but you'll see the 6 focus areas in our learning agenda right here on the screen. And our prior webinars, we have covered areas 1 through 4, which include addressing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, promoting equity, supporting the diverse and talented educator workforce, meeting students' social, emotional, and academic needs. And then the ones we're focusing on specifically today, focus areas 5 and 6 on post-secondary education and managing federal student aid programs. You may wonder, how did we come to the questions I'm about to show you that are kind of nested underneath each of those 6 areas? It was a bit of a crowdsourcing process. Like many agencies, we shared out those broad categories in advance of the publication of any documents in the Federal Register, asking folks to write in and to tell us the questions that they thought were most important to be answered and pointing us in the direction of resources they thought we should be aware of. We took that information, combined it with information we gleaned from our colleagues inside the department and elsewhere in government, and created 42 broad learning questions. I will say, as you look at the full document, as we talk today, you will probably come to the conclusion that there is important work to be done that we have not highlighted. That's okay. If you come across things that you think are large gaps in our learning agenda, we would definitely love to talk after today. So I'll share in a few minutes how to get in touch with us about your ideas on what we've presented. So as I mentioned, we're going to dig into the last 2 topics in the department's learning agenda today. We're actually going to start with Jordan's presentation on effectively managing federal student aid programs, and then I'll follow up on kind of a larger issue of topic area 5 and post-secondary value. Before I turn it over to him, though, I just want to spend a couple more moments just talking about kind of how we conceptualize of this all working together. This is a really simple cycle that probably any of you could have done yourself or deduced on your own, but this is how we're envisioning the kind of intertwined nature of policymaking and evidence use. So, we have at the 11 o'clock position this notion of an emergent policy opportunity, where then we try to apply our best available evidence. In the process of developing the policy we hope to eventually instantiate. That policy is instantiated on the ground, and then we're back into the evidence building phase, where we're trying to, through that foundational fact finding, through that performance measurement, that policy analysis, and that program evaluation, trying to better understand the outcomes associated with or the impacts caused by our policies. We do some measurement to see whether the policy had the intended goal, and we're back up at the opportunity stage again, right? Evaluating our work, seeing if we've achieved our goals, and if not, kind of retooling our work to ensure we get closer next time around. We'll do our deep dive today in a specific strategic goal area. All these things can be found in strategic goal 4 of the department strategic plan, found at performance.gov. Really nested inside 4 strategic objective areas. So we'll come back to these into greater and lesser extents as we talk for the rest of the afternoon. So without further ado, I want to introduce and invite my wonderful colleague, Jordan Matsudaira, to come on screen, come off mute. I will stop talking and turn the show over to him and let him tell you about the great work happening inside the office of the chief economist. Jordan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks for the introduction and that overview. Really happy to be able to talk with everybody here today about some of the things that our office is up to. In a lot of ways, what I'm going to talk about is just a very small sliver of the kinds of things that we're engaged with. The little circular chart that Matt just showed, showing how evidence or policy opportunities spin around the cycle and kind of go through rounds of evidence development and policy development, refinement, and so on. A lot of the goal of creating an office like this is to try to shrink the circumference of that circle and be able to insert evidence into discussions about policy that sometimes last 24 hours or a very short amount of time, and being able to develop evidence and insert it into conversations is a lot of what we spend our time on. What I'm going to talk about today, though, is some of the work that our office is doing to try to build evidence on a longer time horizon and really inform some of the bigger questions that are on the department's learning agenda. So I'm going to spend most of my time there. I want to stress that our office is new, but these functions are not new to the department. So we are trying to scrub into an existing set of people across the department who are already doing great work in this space. And I'm really thankful in that regard to Matt's incredible leadership of the overall enterprise here, of helping to organize our efforts around building evidence on these key issues that the department really needs to understand to improve its programs and improve our overall functioning. But also to folks like our Chief Data Officer, Greg Fortelny, who's done incredible work, again, laying a lot of the foundations for this, trying to put systems in places that help us better partner with outside researchers to bring in, to be able to use our data to do better work and really organize all the structures that organize our data in the department and help different units throughout the agency better use data for this kind of work. And then especially in relation to what I'll talk about today, to a group of people across the Federal Student Aid Agency who really spend a lot of their time using data to do exactly the kinds of things that we're going to do. So our office is really building on top of all of this pre-existing infrastructure in hoping to kind of build capacity that already exists, but really to coordinate it and make it more central to the department's decision making, especially as it regards to higher education. So let me, with that introduction, just get into a couple examples of the kinds of things that we're doing right now. The first is very high level, and that's just really plugging in a focus on evidence into the department's efforts to promote completion. So promoting completion is really one of the key higher education priorities for the department right now. And we're engaged in that work across a number of different fronts. So folks will soon hear of a variety of different grant opportunities that are all focused around this effort. So people on the call will surely know about appropriations the department received recently through the FIPSI program to promote completion, and especially to promote evidence-based solutions and interventions that really help institutions improve completion rates, close gaps in completion, and help shrink especially race-based completion gaps that we see across the sector. One of our focuses there is really making sure that the kinds of investments that we're funding are not sort of one-off experiments that are being pursued in conjunction with these funds, but really hoping to invest in kind of changing the way that institutions think about opportunities to use these, to think about opportunities to learn what works for different sorts of people, and to really, not only perhaps run randomized controlled trial to help evaluate the impact of a particular intervention, but really think about the systems that are in place to help those institutions use their own data to understand how the intervention worked for different sorts of students, and based on what they learn, really kind of refine their approach to helping students improve. So we're really hoping to use these opportunities to invest in not only interventions that have shown promise, but also to nudge institutions in the direction of really putting in place the structures that allow them to learn from experimentation that they're going to do on their own, and really build on whatever is funded through these different programs to really put in place a system that will help them continue to use their data to improve their outcomes for their students. So keep your eye open for upcoming announcements from us on those fronts. The other things I want to talk about are some of the very particular projects that we have underway to understand how our programs work. And this is where some of the work that our office is doing, I think, is really adding some nice capacity to existing capacity in the department. One of the things we're doing is really bringing in academic researchers to come and do a stint in the administration for a while. While they are here, we have them digging into the department's administrative data to really help understand the impact that our programs are having, and conduct experiments to build evidence on how we can make them better. So I'm going to talk about a couple examples like that. Can you advance the slides, Matt? So the first set of things I want to talk about are just some work that we're doing to think about the impact of very particular programs that the department runs, that are obviously very core to the mission of the department overall. So in terms of core to our mission on the higher ed side, perhaps there's no program that's more core than the Pell Grant program, which is the main vehicle that the department has to really subsidize the college experiences of low-income students, and help boost both enrollment rates and then success rates while students are in college. There's been a lot of work that's been done on this program in recent years that have used really increasingly rigorous experimental designs. And through that work, we've really noticed a lot of heterogeneity. So some of that work I've done myself. Other work has been done by people like Leslie Turner, who's also one of the economists who's visiting in our office right now. And one of the things that we've documented in past work across different studies is just a great deal of heterogeneity in the impact that it seems like the Pell Grant program has, like increases in Pell eligibility has on outcomes like college enrollment, completion, post-college earnings outcomes. And there are a lot of theories about why that might be taking place, but the data that exists in the field right now are limited in their capacity to answer that. So one of the kind of examples of that I'll highlight is when you look across different states, it appears that when Pell eligibility is increased, different state aid formula react to those increases in different sorts of ways. There are some states, like the state of Texas, where if a student becomes eligible for more Pell Grant aid, they're actually more likely to get an increase in their state aid. Whereas in other states, exactly the opposite thing happens. If a student receives more Pell Grant aid, their state aid is almost automatically mechanically reduced, sometimes dollar for dollar, in a way that kind of offsets the impact that we think that Pell Grant aid might have. Now, it's hard to explore those kinds of hypotheses without really having comprehensive data available to allow you to estimate the impacts of Pell in a consistent way across institutions or students that are in different states and therefore kind of subject to different state aid formula regimes. And that's one of the real benefits of the data that the department has. So we obviously have comprehensive student level data on all students who are receiving this aid, and that allows us to really, using a consistent approach to estimating the impact that this program has, look across different states. So one of the, I see a lot of folks in the program evaluation kind of causal research community on the list of folks logged in. So people will appreciate the picture that I have here. But the picture that I have here is a depiction of how much Pell Grant aid students are eligible for as a function of their income. And one of the things that's really nice from an evaluation perspective is that the formula that are used to determine students' eligibility for Pell Grant aid is not a very smooth function of people's income. So you can see there's a range where when people have incomes below about $30,000, this is a picture from the 2010 formula. But if you have income below about $30,000, you're eligible for the maximum Pell Grant aid. And then as your income rises, your eligibility is sort of taxed away. And then eventually people earn out of eligibility for Pell Grants. But you can see there's a sudden jump downwards that happens right around a threshold of about $30,000 that's created by what's called an automatic zero EFC formula. So when people have an AGI that's below this automatic EFC threshold, they're automatically eligible for the full amount of the Pell Grant. And that creates this jump where people who have income that's just a little bit higher than $30,000 are eligible here for about $4,500, where people who are have income just above that threshold are eligible for about 20% more than that, so for about $5,200. So you see like a relatively large jump in the amount of Pell Grant aid that students are eligible for amongst a set of students that are very similar to one another in terms of their financial background. That's the kind of condition that gives rise to what we call the regression discontinuity design, where the idea is that if I focus on students who are just above and just below that threshold, I can think of that as kind of approximating the conditions of a randomized controlled trial, assuming a variety of other things that are true that we can also evaluate in this context. So the point is just that when we have access to the administrative data that the department has access to, and given the quirks in a lot of the formula that determine eligibility for different programs that we offer, the combination of those things gives rise to a lot of opportunities to really learn about what works, and that's exactly the kind of thing that our team is devoted to. So in this context, we're really trying to see whether the impacts that Pell has on college completion, on borrowing amounts, on the amount that people earn after they leave college, whether those things are really different across different states, and whether we can understand those differences based on how state aid formula react to the increase in Pell Grant aid. And that might in turn inform different things that we might want to do in terms of applying maintenance of effort conditions on the disbursement of Pell Grant aid to kind of prevent other financial aid programs from kind of undermining the targeting intent of the federal methodology for allocating aid. So that's an example, and I'll try to speed up through my other examples. But another big policy that the department is pursuing are changes to the income-driven repayment plan. Income-driven repayment is an increasingly important way that higher education finance works in the country. So the department has recently proposed a pretty dramatic reform of income-driven repayment plans that will make these plans more generous overall, reducing the amount that borrowers need to repay in the hopes of making loan payments more affordable, making default less likely, and so on. There's some evidence on these questions so far that is obviously relied on in the crafting of the proposals that we have in place already, but there's a lot more that can be done in this space. And again, the picture that I have in this figure gives a little bit of a sense for how we're pursuing this question. So the idea here is that eligibility for different levels of payment depends on people's income. So in the system that's in place right now, if people earn less than 150% of the poverty line, they're not required to make any payments on their loan. And if their earnings are above that threshold, depending on which payment plan you're on, you might pay 10% of your income instead. So one question that we've been exploring is just the question of whether on either side of that threshold, the difference in the amount of payments that people might actually pay is really quite small, because people are paying zero on one side of the threshold and they're paying only 10% of their income just above that threshold on the right-hand side. So the minimum amount that people will be making on the right-hand side might be $5, the minimum payment that we usually charge to people. So it's not a big difference in affordability, but there's a big difference in the kind of hassle burden, if you want to call it that. People on the right-hand side need to make sure they're making monthly payments of as low as $5 every month, whereas people on the left-hand side have no such obligation because they have a zero payment overall. So a question is whether, despite really there not being much difference in how affordable your loan is there nonetheless an impact on the likelihood that borrowers will default on either side of this threshold? And if there is, that really suggests that there is an administrative burden is an inelegant way of describing it, but there's kind of just the hassle of needing to pay for things that is creating frictions that are leading people into default and so on. And that suggests, a variety of solutions that might be different than some of the solutions oriented towards really changing the affordability of loan payments per se. So this is another thing that we're engaged in. Let me quickly talk about some other efforts that we're involved in. So these last couple examples are things where, we're really conducting some longer term research that we think will help inform future efforts to reform some of these very large programs, help make them more effective. In other efforts, we're really trying to develop evidence to help improve the functioning of different aspects of the way we interact with borrowers and help support their success. And we're trying to do that in real time to affect the current ways that the department is actually interacting with the people that we're trying to serve. So one set of examples that I'll talk about is just a set of work that we're doing to really try to improve borrower outcomes. So as we're gearing up to roll out the income-driven repayment plan that I just described, as we're preparing for loan payments to restart later this year, we're really focused on one of the key tools that we have to really help support borrowers, and that's the impact of the outreach that we do directly to borrowers, or that our servicers do to borrowers, to help connect them with different kinds of supports, provide them with information that we think is going to be helpful for them to be successful in repayment. So one of the things that we're doing here, and again, this relies on some of the ideas that we just talked about, is evaluating past efforts and trying to synthesize a lot of the learning that either was produced or could be produced from our past efforts to contact borrowers about a variety of different services that we've offered people. So there are a set of past email campaigns that have been used to help connect people with public sector loan forgiveness, with closed school discharge benefits, with income-driven repayment plans before. In a lot of those cases, there were certain borrowers who were targeted with those messages and certain borrowers who are not, that lend themselves to quasi-experimental evaluation of how being contacted with different kinds of messages impacted take-up. And we can use meta-analytic techniques to look at how those interventions, how those outreach campaigns affected the take-up of whatever benefit we were trying to offer for different groups of borrowers, depending on the different frames that were used, the different kinds of messaging that were used in different instances, and learn about what kinds of messages work best for which kinds of borrowers. And then incorporate that learning into the strategies that we're using to connect borrowers with benefits now. One more thing that I'll mention finally is, and this is hopefully will connect to the call that Matt will circle back to about seeing whether all of you might want to help us in some of these efforts, is while we're kind of designing some of these outreach campaigns, we're also trying to develop infrastructure to help us both evaluate the effectiveness of them and learn very rapidly on the fly. And we're very open to partnering with folks who have great ideas about how best to do this. So an example of that is we've been working with a group of behavioral science researchers to really develop different sorts of messages to help borrowers who, once loan payments restart, who might be falling behind on their payments, to reconnect them with the payment system to avoid them falling into default again. So together with these outside researchers, we've designed kind of multi-arm bandit trials, essentially, where we have a bunch of different kinds of messages that we're all trying to send out to randomly chosen different groups of borrowers who are in the position of falling behind on their payments, each offering different kinds of supports using different kinds of behavioral framing and so on. And very rapidly trying to learn over the course of a couple of months which of those messages appear to be most effective at connecting borrowers back with the system, and then reallocating our effort. Right. So as we learn which messages are most effective for which kinds of borrowers, then we will, go away from this random assignment of messages to different borrowers and start to use the messages that we've shown to be most effective in our outreach campaign, with the hope of benefiting the most borrowers that we can. So that's maybe not as quick as Matt wanted, but hopefully a quick overview of some of the work that we're doing overall. But I look forward to any conversation at the end. But let me throw it back to Matt.
Hey, thanks, Jordan. That was great. And I really want to just, again, highlight the real exceptional work happening in the Office of the Undersecretary and the Office of the Chief Economist. I really loved Jordan's metaphor of shrinking the circumference of that policy evidence cycle. And I think you saw from this presentation that they really are walking the talk and really making the goals of the Evidence Act real. If you were to dig into our learning agenda and go into Pillar 6 and see the questions that we have that relate to student financial aid programs, you would find these 6 questions. And I think you heard Jordan touch on work that addresses every single one of them. So you just heard about the borrower experience. That's critical both as students interact with us at FSA, but also with our servicers. You heard him talk about repayment and how it is we can ensure that students are able to repay their loans. You heard him talk about the impact on Title IV programs. So all of those are things that you see in these 6 questions and more that we have in our learning agenda. And don't worry, Jordan, I will definitely circle back at the end to re-invite, perhaps even entreat folks who are on the call to get involved in this effort. There truly is more work in this space alone than the department can do on its own. And remember, that is only 1/6 of our entire kind of learning agenda. So to that end, there is a whole second set of questions that we have that are related to post-secondary success, but aren't directly related to federal student aid programs. And so I'm showing you just a few of them here on the screen. You'll see a bit of the mapping between very specific strategic objectives that our policy leadership has set for us and have put in the agency's strategic plan on the left. And then on the right side, priority learning questions that map to each of them. We're not going to go through all of these this afternoon because we do want to save time for questions. I hope you were taking notes as Jordan was presenting, but I want to talk about a few of them and share with you some of the work that's happening and perhaps some of the work that could or should be happening to further add insight to our own policymaking processes inside the department. So as I dig into these next 3 or 4 slides, I want you to have a few questions in the back of your mind. And if you want, be prepared at the end to put in chat or come off mute and give voice to your answers. So first, if you hear us asking a question and you feel with some degree of confidence that the answer already exists, please raise your hand and tell us about it. I would not deign to think that we're aware of all the work that's happened in a space. And so if you have information you think we don't have, but would benefit from, I would sincerely appreciate receiving it. 2, given the strategic objectives that we're sharing with you today and that you see on the screen, are there key questions that you think are missing? We know we have blind spots and we would love to have help in surfacing them and shining a light on them. And finally, and again, most importantly, perhaps at the broken record stage at this point, am I seeing a question that I would like to collaborate on answering? So if you want to weigh in about 10 minutes on any of these topics, please feel free to do so when we open it up. So now I'm going to go into just four of the priority learning questions that we have in Pillar 5, that larger post-secondary pillar of our learning agenda that we hope to answer, and then share with you a few of the examples of work that are already underway. And this is clearly not exhaustive. There are other things happening, but just to give you a flavor of the kind of work that's happening department-wide related to these topics. And so the very first question, perhaps no surprise, relates to the notion of readiness and access. How can we ensure that all students have the opportunity to gain access to additional education and training after high school, with a kind of particular interest, of course, as we're federal policymakers, in federal policies and programs we're already sponsoring to help support those efforts. And so three things I would point out to you as being important for you to be aware of as we answer these questions. So inside my center and CEE, we have a series of ongoing evidence building activities designed to support and build learning to this question through our Gear Up program, gaining early awareness and readiness for undergraduate programs. And so that includes not just a study of college transition using text messages in Gear Up, but also a study of the financial aid supports that are built into Gear Up and designed to help students via scholarships attend college. And again, those are both the kinds of evaluations that you might typically associate with IES and our evaluation center. And just 2 years ago, we completed similar work inside Upward Bound, where we did a study of a specific enhanced advising strategy through Upward Bound programs designed to improve students' college fit. So that's happening in IES in our evaluation center. In another part of IES, still inside my center, the regional educational labs are working with their state and district partners to try to do very similar kind of things. So through partnerships we have across the country, in the Appalachian region, in the Central region, Northeastern Islands, and West, we're working with states and large districts to strengthen students' readiness for college and careers. In our prior cycle that we just wrapped up in 2021, we worked with folks in the Pacific, the Southeast and Northwest, and elsewhere to really leverage the administrative data that states and large districts had at their disposal to improve those jurisdictions' abilities to predict student readiness for post-secondary study, and then obviously target resources more effectively towards those students to ensure all students were ready for that transition. And then finally, I certainly given us on the call, would not want to not mention the numerous field initiated grants that folks are working on through our National Center for Education Research and Special Education Research on this very same topic. And so we have examples here on the screen of randomized trials focused on specific access interventions for youth in foster care. We have interventions related to reducing summer melt and many other issues that kind of get to the larger issue of readiness and access for post-secondary education. So once someone is in and has accessed college, we have kind of a next question in that temporal ordering. What policies, programs, and services are really effective in helping students successfully complete a post-secondary credential? And again, we have work all across IES and the department more broadly focused on this issue. So we just completed here in our National Center for Education Research a 5-year cycle of work in our college completion network. Inside that network, there were 5 great projects, all focused on completion. So you'll see on the screen, we had one strand of work related to getting near completers across the finish line using personalized text messages. We had an evaluation of student success courses and associated services to boost college success for men of color, college completion grants, a growth mindset intervention deployed at community colleges, and then accelerated pathways through development education. So that network just wrapped up. Its findings are just being made broadly available, although you may have seen findings presented at conferences or a recent event we had here at IES. We have a new investment kind of in a similar vein, what we're calling the Community College Recovery Research Network, focused specifically on supporting community college students and institutions in pandemic recovery. So lots of great work happening in NCER. I'm really excited that this January, we closed applications for our National Center for Special Education's Research newest R&D center, which will, for 5 years, beginning in late summer, early fall, focus broadly on the notion of supporting students with disabilities in post-secondary education. The first time we've had an R&D center on that topic inside NCSER. And of course, just like in the college access portfolio, there are dozens of grants that both NCER and NCSER have awarded to university-based researchers, researchers at social science research firms, and the like, all focused on post-secondary and adult student success the past 5 years. Now, I don't have a slide on this next topic because we don't have a lot of research on this next topic. So a challenge to those of you who are looking to help us build evidence. We have a good amount of research, or at least a budding amount of research, on issues related to student supports, including things that are authorized under Title IV of the Higher Education Act. But we have comparatively little information and evidence at our disposal about federal funds directed towards institutions at the post-secondary level, like that might be built through Title III, for example. So if you have an interest in institution serving programs, or how there is complementarity between institution serving programs and student serving programs, we would love to talk more. That is a gap we're aware of, and would like to leverage your best thoughts on how we might begin to fill that gap. Third question, with a specific interest here now in adult learners, how does that we support engaging adult learners in education and training programs that increase employability in high demand and high wage careers? So a few things that you should be aware of. So as part of our work to build effective approaches that might be relevant to WIO providers, so that could be state providers or local agencies who are serving adult learners through the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, we are beginning an impact study on training programs for career navigators, specifically focused on adult learners. What's really great about this work is it actively complements work happening inside DOL, Department of Labor, on other navigation approaches. So there's this great synergy across ed and labor, building a lot of information around this very popular kind of set of programs supporting adult learners into education and careers. So we look forward to seeing those work together. And in preparation for that work, NCEE released a systematic review of existing strategies across a variety of categories, including literacy, numeracy, English language acquisition, adult basic and secondary education, and the like, really trying to understand what was already out there in the evidence space. As part of that work, which I was just reviewing again last night, we reviewed 2,000 potential sources of information that includes reports, papers, and journals, of which only 54 were efficacy studies, of which only 22 met What Works Clearinghouse standards. So put a pin in that for a second, because I'll be right back. In a third stream of work, our peer office, the Office of Career Technical Adult Education, OCTAE, sponsored in recent years what they call the Advancing Innovation in Adult Education project, designed to surface from the field practices that they felt were innovative across secondary credentialing, bridge programs, IETs, and holistic approaches to adult education. Those were held up, spotlighted, bright spotted, but were not accompanied by attempts to build rigorous evidence. So my entreaty to you all in the adult education space is that there is a strong need to build rigorous evidence on the efficacy of programs like these to ensure adult learners have access to high quality programs to prepare them for the workforce. That funnel of 2,000 sources to 54 efficacy studies to 22 studies that meet WWC standards simply is much too narrow, much too fast. And it really is high time for education sciences to double down on what works to better meet the needs of post-secondary and adult learners. And then finally, a question about policies, programs, and services that support transitions that are both seamless and cost-effective between the secondary space and the post-secondary space, as well as training after high school, as well as between post-secondary institutions. So already, both in this webinar and in prior webinars, we've talked about some related transition works. This includes transitions for high school students through college access programs, through dual enrollment work, early college high schools. We've talked about work related to Perkins and secondary CTE programs. Really notably, we're excited about new appropriations in the fiscal 23 Consolidated Appropriations Act that gives us an opportunity to perhaps expand our transition lens, looking at transitions for students served by IDEA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act to education, careers, independent living. So a new opportunity that we may be able to leverage. There are lots of opportunities, I think, inside this question area for those who are interested to step in and help us in the evidence building efforts. And they are certainly not limited to the topics I show here on the slide, but things like curricular alignment between secondary and post-secondary institutions to increase readiness for college level work, strategies to promote the transferability of post-secondary credits between institutions of higher education to reduce time and cost to degree. And then particularly in secondary settings, such as career-connected high schools, think about how we can better leverage internships, apprenticeships, opportunities to learn industry credentials, and similar innovations to facilitate smooth, low-cost, seamless transitions to training and work and life after high school. So lots of great work already happening, most notably inside our Office of the Chief Economist, but lots of additional great work to be done. And so I really hope that we have inspired you to kind of pick up the mantle. And so to that end, the thing I say at the end of each of these webinars, evidence building is a team sport. So if you share our passion on any of these questions or even ones that are adjacent, we want to collaborate with you. We will not be able to do this work without you. We simply have more questions than we have answers. Jordan has begun already to telegraph the kind of ways that you might get engaged. We would love to do more of that than we currently are. So if you think you would like to get involved, either by sharing information about work you've already done, about joining us and exploring a question of mutual interest, learning more about what our priorities are to see how they might fit with yours, please reach out to us. You can email us at evidence@ed.gov, or you can certainly feel free to reach out to any of us individually. Here at the department, we are really inventive when it comes to our email addresses. You can reach us all at firstname.lastname@ed.gov. So if you don't want to email evidence@ed.gov, feel free to contact me directly at matthew.soldner@ed.gov. All right. So with that, I'm going to give folks just a minute to think about questions they might want to raise, either through things that I mentioned or things that Jordan shared in today's presentation. So in just 1 second, I'm going to re-enable the chat so that everyone is able to put their question in the chat box. Before I do that, I'll go ahead and get you started on one easy question everyone always asks, which is, why doesn't the learning agenda include X topic? And X topic is invariably this person's favorite topic, and they wonder why we aren't asking questions about it. To which my answer is, we were forced to make tough choices in the questions we prioritized. And given the nature of the law, we were asked to hew our questions closely to the department's strategic goals and objectives. That said, if you have a question that you do not see anywhere in our learning agenda when you go online to look it up, that is not a signal that there is not someone or many someones in the department who care about that issue. Please feel free to reach out to us, either directly or to evidence@ed.gov to talk about those areas of potential shared interest and where we might be able to do some work. So with that, I'm going to turn the recording off, and I'm going to turn mics and cameras back on, and we will take questions from the audience.